Hey there, and welcome to this quiet corner of history. Before we step back through the centuries to a world lit only by candle flame and warmed only by hearth fire, I wanted to extend a gentle greeting to you, dear listener. Whether you're settling in for the night, looking to unwind after a long day, or simply curious about how our ancestors lived when the world moved at the pace of oxen rather than engines, I'm so glad you've chosen to join me tonight. If you don't mind, I'd love to know where in the world you're listening from and what time it is for you right now. Feel free to drop a comment and let me know. There's something wonderfully comforting about knowing we're all sharing this journey through time together, no matter where we are or when we're listening. Now, let the stresses of our modern world fade away as we travel back to a time when alarm clocks didn't exist, when the rhythm of life followed the sun and seasons, and when a single village might contain an entire universe of human experience. Tonight, we're going to live a day in the life of a medieval peasant. From the first pale light of dawn to the last dying ember of the evening fire, picture yourself awakening not to the buzz of a smartphone or the hum of electricity, but to the distant crow of a rooster and the gentle lowing of cattle in the yard outside your home. The year is somewhere around 1300, and you live in a small village whose name has long since been forgotten by history. Your world is measured not in miles, but in footsteps, not in nations, but in the boundaries of your Lord's manor, and not in abstract time, but in the eternal cycle of planting, growing, and harvest. This isn't the medieval world of knights in shining armor or grand stone castles that we see in movies. This is the world of calloused hands and aching backs, of simple meals shared by firelight, of prayers whispered in the darkness, and of a life lived so close to the earth that you can feel its rhythms in your very bones. It's a world that would seem impossibly harsh to our modern sensibilities, yet it sustained millions of people for centuries, creating communities bound together by necessity, faith, and the shared understanding that survival required everyone to play their part. Let's begin at dawn, when the world is still painted in shades of grey and gold, and the air carries the mingled scents of wood smoke, animals, and the rich earth that will define every aspect of your day. The first thing you notice as consciousness slowly returns is the cold. Not the kind of cold that makes you reach for a thermostat or pull up another blanket, but the bone-deep chill of a world without central heating, where warmth is a precious commodity that must be carefully tended and never wasted. Your breath mists in the air above your straw mattress, and you can hear the wind whistling through the gaps in the wattle and daub walls of your cottage. You share this single room with your entire family. Your wife lies beside you, still wrapped in the coarse woolen cloak she wore to bed, because undressing completely in winter would be an invitation to freeze. Your 3 children are huddled together, on their own straw pallet against the far wall, their small bodies pressed close for warmth. The baby, barely a year old, sleeps between you and your wife, her tiny form a constant source of both joy and worry, in a world where infant mortality hovers around 40%. This room, perhaps 12 feet by 15 feet, is your entire world when the sun goes down. It serves as bedroom, kitchen, workshop, and shelter for the 2 goats and handful of chickens that represent much of your family's wealth. The animals' body heat helps warm the space, though their presence also means the air is thick with the earthy smells of livestock and the ever-present undertone of human habitation in close quarters. There's no bathroom, of course. Chamber pots serve that function, though in winter you're more likely to simply step outside into the yard, where the frozen ground crunches under your feet and the shock of cold air drives away any lingering drowsiness. Privacy is a luxury that doesn't exist in your world. Everything happens in full view of your family, and everyone learns early to politely ignore the bodily functions of others. As you sit up on your mattress, stuffed with straw that crackles with every movement, you automatically cross yourself and murmur a brief prayer of thanksgiving for surviving another night. Death is a constant companion in your world, arriving without warning in the form of disease, accident, or simply the slow wearing away that comes from a lifetime of hard labor. Each morning you wake is a small miracle, a gift not to be taken for granted. The fire in the center of the room has burned down to glowing embers, but it hasn't gone out completely. This is crucial. Starting a fire from scratch is difficult and time-consuming, requiring flint, steel, and tinder, along with considerable skill. Keeping the fire alive through the night is one of the most important tasks in your household, and failure to do so could mean a cold, dark start to the day. You rise quietly, trying not to wake the others, and pad barefoot across the packed earth floor to tend the fire. Your feet are tough from a lifetime without shoes for much of the year, but the cold still bites at your soles. You carefully add small pieces of kindling to the embers, blowing gently until tiny flames begin to lick at the dry wood. The growing light dances across the rough walls, illuminating the few possessions that make up your material world. There's a wooden chest that holds your family's spare clothing, such as it is. A few clay pots for cooking and storage. Some simple tools. A wooden crucifix hanging on the wall. The most precious object in your home because it represents your connection to God and the promise of salvation in the world to come. Perhaps a small knife, carefully maintained because metal is expensive, and a good blade might last a lifetime if properly cared for. As the fire begins to provide both light and warmth, you move to wake your wife. She stirs slowly, her face lined with the premature aging that comes from bearing children, working from dawn to dusk, and living constantly on the edge of subsistence. But her eyes are warm when they meet yours, and she smiles briefly before the weight of another day's responsibilities settles on her shoulders. Together, you begin the morning routine that has remained essentially unchanged for generations. Your wife moves to the corner where she keeps the family's food stores, carefully ration supplies that must last until the next harvest. You step outside to check on the larger animals, the pig in its pen, and the ox that represents your family's most valuable possession after your small plot of land. The morning air is sharp and clean, carrying the scent of wood smoke from other cottages as your neighbours begin their own daily routines. The village is waking up around you, though village might be too grand a term for this collection of perhaps 20 families scattered across a landscape of fields, meadows, and carefully managed woodland. You can see smoke rising from other chimneys, hear the distant sound of someone chopping wood, and catch a glimpse of your neighbour already leading his cow out to pasture. The sky is beginning to lighten in the east, though the sun hasn't yet appeared above the line of trees that marks the boundary of your known world. This is the time of day you love most, when the air is still and peaceful, and the endless cycle of work hasn't yet begun in earnest. For just a few minutes, you can stand in your dooryard and feel a deep connection to the land that sustains you, to the community that surrounds you, and to the God who watches over it all. But the moment of peace can't last long. There's too much to do, and the short winter days don't allow for extended contemplation. Your wife appears in the doorway, already dressed in her long woolen gown and head covering, holding a wooden bowl containing the family's breakfast. It's not much by modern standards, a thin porridge made from oats and barley, perhaps flavoured with a bit of bacon fat if you're fortunate, or simply seasoned with salt if you're not. The children are stirring now, the older ones helping to dress their younger siblings in the dim light of the cottage. Your eldest son, perhaps 8 years old, is already learning to help with the morning chores. Your daughter, 6, tends to the baby while your wife prepares the meal. Everyone has a role to play, even the youngest, because survival in your world depends on the coordinated effort of the entire family working together. You eat standing by the fire, sharing the single bowl and wooden spoon that serve the entire family. The porridge is filling, if not particularly flavourful, providing the energy you'll need for the day's work ahead. As you eat, you and your wife discuss the tasks that await. The season is late autumn, after the harvest, but before the deep cold of winter sets in, so there's still much to be done. The grain needs to be threshed and winnowed. The vegetable garden requires attention, with root crops to be dug and stored before they freeze. Firewood must be gathered and split, enough to last through the dark months ahead. The cottage needs repairs where the autumn storms have damaged the thatch roof or loosened the clay between the wooden frame. And always, there are the animals to tend, the daily milking and feeding that can't be postponed regardless of weather or season. As you finish your breakfast and prepare to begin the day's work, you're acutely aware of how different your morning routine is from that of someone living in our modern world. You haven't checked your phone because phones don't exist. You haven't worried about traffic or appointments because your world extends only as far as you can walk in a day. You haven't turned on lights or hot water or any of the 100 conveniences that modern people take for granted. Instead, you've awakened to a world that operates according to natural rhythms, where the position of the sun determines your schedule and the changing seasons dictate your priorities. It's a harder life in many ways, but also a simpler one, where your purpose is clear and your place in the community is well defined. You are a peasant, bound to the land and to your lord, but also connected to a web of relationships and traditions that have sustained your people for countless generations. As you step outside into the growing light of dawn, ready to begin another day of labor that will carry you from sunrise to sunset, you carry with you the accumulated wisdom of centuries. You know which clouds mean rain and which mean clear skies. You can judge the fertility of soil by its color and texture. You understand the subtle signs that tell you when to plant and when to harvest, when to breed your animals, and when to slaughter them for winter meat. This knowledge isn't written in books, because you can't read, and books are rarer than gold in your world. Instead, it's passed down through generations of careful observation and hard-won experience, stored in memory, and shared through stories told by firelight on winter evenings. You are the heir to a tradition of survival that stretches back to the dawn of agriculture, and every day you add your own small chapter to that continuing story. The sun breaks over the horizon now, painting the fields and meadows in shades of gold and amber. The working day has begun, and with it the eternal cycle of human effort that has sustained civilization since the first farmer planted the first seed in carefully prepared soil. You are part of something larger than yourself, connected to the land, to your community, and to the great chain of being that links earth to heaven. This is your world, harsh but beautiful, simple but profound. A world where every day brings its own challenges and rewards, where survival depends on skill and cooperation, and where the rhythm of life follows patterns as old as humanity itself. As we follow you through this day, from the morning tasks in your fields to the evening prayers by your hearth, we'll discover not just how different life was 700 years ago, but also how much we share with these ancestors whose blood flows in our veins and whose struggles echo in our own. The first major task of your day takes you to the fields that surround your village like a patchwork quilt sewn from brown earth and stubbled grain. These aren't your fields, exactly. Nothing in your world belongs to you in the way we understand ownership today. Instead, you hold strips of land scattered across the manor's territory, some good, some poor, allocated according to customs so ancient that no one remembers when they began. This system, which scholars will one day call the three-field system, ensures that everyone gets a fair share of both fertile and marginal soil. Your main strip lies about half a mile from your cottage, a narrow band of earth perhaps an acre in size, bordered by your neighbours' plots and marked only by the slight ridges where countless ploughs have turned the soil in the same direction for generations. As you walk toward it in the crisp morning air, you pass other villagers heading to their own strips, exchanging quiet greetings and brief comments about the weather. Weather isn't small talk in your world. It's a matter of life and death, determining whether your family eats well or goes hungry in the months to come. The harvest was completed weeks ago, a community effort that saw the entire village working together to bring in the grain before the autumn rains could ruin it. Now the field is covered with stubble, the short stalks of barley and oats that remain after the grain heads have been cut and gathered. This stubble serves multiple purposes in your carefully managed agricultural system. The animals will graze on it, fertilizing the soil with their droppings, while gleaning any grain that was missed during the harvest. Later, you'll plough it under, adding organic matter to improve the soil for next year's crop. But today's task is different. You're here to collect the gleaning, the scattered grains that fell during harvest and have since dried in the autumn sun. Every grain is precious in your world, where the difference between a good harvest and a poor one can mean the difference between survival and starvation. You move methodically across the field, bent at the waist, your experienced eyes spotting grains that others might miss. Your back aches from the constant bending, but you've learned to ignore minor discomforts. Pain is a constant companion in your world, and complaining about it serves no purpose. The work is meditative in its repetition, allowing your mind to wander as your hands perform the familiar motions. You think about the tasks that await you back at the cottage, about your family's needs for the coming winter, about the small disputes and alliances that make up the social fabric of your village. You worry about your youngest child, who has been coughing for the past few days, and you offer silent prayers for her health. In a world without doctors or medicine as we know them, prayer and herbal remedies are your only defenses against illness. As the sun climbs higher, the work becomes warmer, and you remove the rough woolen cloak that protects you from the morning chill. Underneath, you wear a simple tunic made from coarse linen, dyed brown with bark and roots gathered from the forest. Your leggings are wool, darned and redarned where they've worn through. Your shoes, if you can call them that, are simple leather slippers that provide minimal protection from stones and thorns. Better shoes exist, but they're expensive, and yours must last until you can afford to have the village cobbler make you a new pair. The other villagers working nearby create a companionable atmosphere, though little conversation passes between you. Everyone understands the urgency of gathering what can be gathered before winter makes outdoor work impossible. You recognize the rhythms of shared labor, the way people space themselves to avoid interfering with each other's work, while still providing the comfort of human presence. This is community in its most basic form, not grand gestures or formal ceremonies, but the simple act of working alongside your neighbors toward common goals. By mid-morning, your cloth bag is heavy with gathered grain, enough to make several loaves of bread or add substance to the family's daily porridge. You straighten slowly, feeling the familiar ache in your lower back, and survey the field one more time to ensure you haven't missed any obvious concentrations of grain. Waste is a sin in your world, both practically and spiritually, and the careful use of every resource is a virtue taught from childhood. The walk back to your cottage takes you past the village well, where several women have gathered to draw water for their households. The well is one of the focal points of village life, a place where news is shared and social bonds are maintained. You nod to the women as you pass, noting which of them look tired or worried, filing away information that might be useful later. In a community this small, everyone's welfare affects everyone else's, and keeping track of your neighbour's circumstances is both courtesy and practical necessity. Your wife meets you at the cottage door, her own morning tasks completed. She's been tending the family's small vegetable garden, harvesting the last of the root vegetables before the ground freezes. Turnips, parsnips, and onions lie in neat piles beside the cottage, ready to be stored in the root cellar that your grandfather dug beneath the floor. These vegetables, along with the grain you've just gathered and the preserved meat from the pig you slaughtered last month, will form the backbone of your family's diet through the long winter months. The preservation of food is a skill that every household must master, because there are no grocery stores to fall back on when supplies run low. Your wife knows exactly how to layer vegetables in sand to keep them from rotting, how to salt meat so it will last for months, how to dry herbs and fruits so they retain their nutritional value. This knowledge, passed down from mother to daughter for countless generations, is as valuable as any written book and far more practical for daily survival. As you empty your bag of gleaned grain into the family's storage chest, you take a moment to assess your winter preparations. The chest is perhaps half full, which should be enough to last until spring if you're careful, and if no unexpected disasters befall your family. You've learned not to take survival for granted, having lived through seasons when the harvest failed and families went hungry despite their best efforts. The margin between sufficiency and want is always narrow in your world, and prudent planning is essential. The next task of the day takes you to the forest that borders your village's fields. This isn't the wild, untamed woodland of fairy tales, but a carefully managed resource that provides everything from building materials to fuel to food supplements. You carry a wooden yoke across your shoulders, designed to help you transport the heavy loads of firewood that will keep your family warm through the winter. The path to the forest is well worn, marked by generations of villagers who have made this same journey countless times. Forest law is complex and strictly enforced in your world. You can't simply cut down any tree you fancy. Different trees serve different purposes, and the Lord's foresters keep careful track of what's harvested and by whom. Dead wood is free for the taking, and you're allowed to gather fallen branches and collect the wood from trees that have been marked for cutting. But cutting a living tree without permission can result in severe punishment, because the forest is too valuable a resource to be managed haphazardly. As you enter the cool shade beneath the trees, you feel a sense of peace that's different from the open feeling of the fields. The forest has its own rhythm, its own community of plants and animals, its own ancient wisdom. You move carefully, looking for the dry branches and fallen logs that will burn well in your cottage hearth. Your experienced eye can judge the quality of wood at a glance, knowing which pieces will burn hot and clean, and which will smoke too much or burn too quickly. The work of gathering firewood is physically demanding, requiring you to lift and carry heavy loads over uneven ground. But it's also satisfying in a way that modern people might find difficult to understand. Each piece of wood you gather represents warmth for your family, light for your evening activities, heat for cooking your meals. There's a direct connection between your labour and your family's comfort that creates a sense of purpose and accomplishment. As you work, you encounter other villagers pursuing their own forest tasks. Some are gathering nuts and berries to supplement their winter food stores. Others are collecting bark for tanning leather or roots for dyeing cloth. A few are hunting for the small game that supplements the village's meat supply, though hunting larger animals is reserved for the Lord and his guests. The forest provides for everyone, but according to strict rules that ensure its continued productivity. The sounds of the forest surround you as you work. Birds call to each other in the canopy above. Small animals rustle through the underbrush. The wind whispers through the leaves that still cling to the branches, painting them in shades of gold and red and brown. These sounds are familiar and comforting, part of the natural soundtrack of your world. You can identify most of the birds by their calls, know which animals are harmless, and which might pose a threat. Understand the subtle changes in the forest's voice that signal approaching weather. By the time the sun reaches its zenith, you've gathered a substantial load of firewood, enough to last your family for several days if you're careful about how you use it. The yoke across your shoulders distributes the weight evenly, but you still feel the strain in your neck and back as you make your way home along the forest path. This is honest work, the kind that produces immediate, tangible results, and despite the physical discomfort, there's satisfaction in knowing you've provided for your family's needs. The return journey gives you time to think about the afternoon's tasks that await you. There's grain to be threshed, separating the edible kernels from the inedible chaff through the rhythmic beating that will echo across the village as other families pursue the same task. There are tools to be mended and sharpened, because maintaining your equipment is essential when replacement is expensive and difficult. There are animals to be tended, children to be supervised, and the countless small tasks that keep a household functioning. As you approach your cottage, you can see smoke rising from the chimney hole in the roof, indicating that your wife has built up the fire in preparation for the midday meal. The sight fills you with a quiet contentment, the satisfaction of returning home to warmth and family after a morning of productive labour. This rhythm of work and rest, of leaving and returning, of effort and reward, forms the basic pattern of your days and gives structure to your life in ways that go deeper than any clock or calendar. The cottage welcomes you back with its familiar smells and sounds. The gentle crackling of the fire mixing with the soft murmur of your children's voices as they help their mother prepare the family's main meal of the day. Your wife looks up from the iron pot hanging over the flames, her face flushed from the heat but brightened by a smile that speaks of shared burdens and quiet affection. In your world, marriage isn't built on romantic love as we understand it today, but on partnership, mutual dependence, and the deep bonds that form between people who face life's challenges together. The meal she's preparing is simple but nourishing. A thick pottage made from the barley you harvested weeks ago, flavoured with onions from the garden and perhaps a small piece of salted pork if the family's stores allow for such luxury. The smell makes your stomach growl, reminding you that breakfast was many hours and much labour ago. You set down your load of firewood in the designated corner, stacking it carefully to ensure proper drying and easy access during the cold nights ahead. Your eldest son approaches with the quiet respect that children show their parents in your world, where survival depends on everyone understanding their role and fulfilling their responsibilities without question. He's been helping his mother with the morning's domestic tasks, learning the skills he'll need when he eventually establishes his own household. At 8 years old, he's already capable of feeding chickens, gathering eggs, and helping with simple cooking tasks. Childhood in your world is brief, not because children aren't loved, but because the practical demands of survival require everyone to contribute according to their abilities. The midday meal is eaten standing around the fire, the family sharing wooden bowls and spoons carved by your grandfather's careful hands. There's little conversation during eating, partly because food is too precious to be wasted through distraction, and partly because the day's work is far from finished. You eat methodically, savouring the warmth and sustenance while mentally preparing for the afternoon's tasks. The pottage fills your belly and provides the energy you'll need for the hours of labour that stretch ahead until darkness calls a halt to outdoor work. After the meal, you turn your attention to one of the most important tasks of late autumn, the threshing of grain that will provide flour for bread throughout the winter months. The grain was cut during harvest and has been drying in sheaves stacked in your cottage's small storage area. Now it must be beaten to separate the precious kernels from the stalks and chaff, a process that requires patience, skill, and considerable physical effort. You spread a large cloth on the packed earth floor of your cottage, creating a clean surface for the work ahead. The grain sheaves are laid out carefully, and you take up the flail, a tool consisting of 2 wooden sticks connected by leather thongs. The rhythm of threshing is ancient and hypnotic, a steady beating that echoes from cottage to cottage as your neighbours pursue the same essential task. Your wife and older children take turns with the flail, each person adding their effort to the family's collective work. The sound of threshing creates a village-wide percussion section, dozens of families beating out the rhythm of survival in their own homes. It's a sound that speaks of preparation, of foresight, of the careful planning that means the difference between plenty and want in the months to come. The work is dusty and tiring, filling the air with chaff that makes you cough and coating everyone with a fine layer of grain dust that will require washing later, when you can spare the water and fuel needed to heat it. As the afternoon progresses, the pile of clean grain grows steadily, golden kernels that represent security and sustenance for your family. Each grain has been earned through months of careful labour, from the spring ploughing through summer cultivation to autumn harvest. And now, this final processing. There's a deep satisfaction in seeing the tangible results of your year's work, accumulating in neat piles, ready to be ground into flour or cooked into porridge as needed. The winnowing comes next, a delicate process of separating grain from chaff using nothing more than a gentle breeze and careful timing. You pour the beaten grain from a height, allowing the wind to carry away the lighter chaff while the heavier kernels fall into a waiting basket. It's work that requires patience and skill, the kind of knowledge that comes only from years of practice and careful observation. Your wife is particularly skilled at winnowing, her experienced hands judging exactly the right height and angle to achieve clean separation. Between the agricultural tasks, there are animals to tend, each species requiring different care and attention. The family pig, a valuable asset that will provide meat for winter meals, needs to be fed and watered. Pigs in your world aren't the clean pink creatures of modern farms, but hardy, semi-wild animals capable of surviving on scraps and forage. Your pig is intelligent and resourceful, supplementing its diet with roots and nuts it finds while foraging in the woodland areas where it's allowed to roam. The chickens require different attention, their small size making them vulnerable to predators, while their egg production makes them too valuable to lose to carelessness. You check their simple coop, ensuring the wooden structure remains secure against foxes and other threats. The eggs they produce are precious, providing protein that can be stored for several days or used immediately to enrich the family's diet. A good laying hen is worth her weight in silver, and you guard your small flock carefully. The family's greatest treasure, aside from your small plot of land, is the ox that provides the muscle power for ploughing and other heavy agricultural work. This massive animal represents years of saving and careful management, and its health directly affects your family's ability to work the land effectively. You check the ox carefully, running experienced hands over its legs and body, looking for any signs of injury or illness that might threaten its working ability. The ox is fed carefully measured portions of hay and grain, enough to maintain its strength without wasting precious resources. As the sun begins its descent toward the western horizon, painting the sky in shades of gold and red, you turn your attention to the maintenance tasks that keep your household functioning. Tools require constant care in your world, where iron is expensive and skilled blacksmiths are rare. You sharpen the blade of your scythe with a whetstone, checking the wooden handle for cracks or loose bindings. The flail used for threshing is examined carefully, its leather connections adjusted and tightened as needed. Your wife tends to her own tools, the spinning wheel that turns wool into thread, the loom that transforms thread into cloth, the various implements used for cooking and food preparation. In your world, almost everything your family needs must be made at home, from clothing to furniture to the wooden bowls and spoons used for eating. Store-bought goods are rare and expensive, available only during the occasional visits of travelling merchants who bring salt, iron implements, and other necessities that can't be produced locally. The late afternoon also brings time for the domestic crafts that occupy much of your wife's time throughout the year. She sits by the fire with her spinning wheel, transforming the wool from your small flock of sheep into the thread that will eventually become clothing for your family. The steady rhythm of the wheel provides a soothing counterpoint to the other sounds of the household. Children playing quietly in the corner, the fire crackling in the hearth, animals moving restlessly in their designated areas. Your daughter, now old enough to begin learning women's work, sits beside her mother with a simple spindle, practicing the hand motions that will eventually allow her to contribute to the family's cloth production. These skills aren't optional extras in your world, but essential survival abilities that every woman must master. The clothing your family wears, the blankets that keep you warm, the sacks that store your grain, all depend on your wife's skill with wheel and loom. As darkness begins to gather outside your cottage, you bring the day's outdoor work to a close and focus on the evening tasks that prepare your household for another night. The animals must be secured against predators and weather, their simple shelters checked and reinforced as needed. The fire must be banked carefully, with enough fuel to last through the night, but not so much that it poses a danger to your thatched roof. The evening meal is simpler than the midday pottage. Perhaps bread and ale with a bit of cheese, if your family is fortunate enough to have any. You eat by firelight, the dancing flames creating shifting shadows on the walls, while outside the wind picks up and reminds you of the approaching winter. There's comfort in this simple ritual. The family gathered together around the warmth and light, safe from the darkness and cold that wait beyond your threshold. As you prepare for sleep, the day's accomplishments feel substantial despite their humble nature. Grain has been processed, animals tended, tools maintained, and preparations made for the challenges that tomorrow will surely bring. It's not the kind of productivity measured by modern metrics, but the deeper satisfaction that comes from work directly connected to survival and family welfare. Each task completed brings your household one step closer to successfully weathering another winter, another year, another cycle in the eternal rhythm of agricultural life. The prayers that end your day aren't rushed formalities, but heartfelt expressions of gratitude for survival and hope for continued protection. In a world where death lurks behind every illness, accident, or failed harvest, faith provides both comfort and structure, explaining the inexplicable and offering hope for better times ahead. As you settle onto your straw mattress beside your family, you carry with you the quiet satisfaction of duty fulfilled and the knowledge that tomorrow will bring its own challenges and rewards in the endless cycle of peasant life. The transition from day into evening in your medieval world doesn't happen with the flip of a switch or the glow of electric lights, gradually replacing the sun's warmth. Instead, it's a gradual dimming that begins almost imperceptibly in mid-afternoon and slowly deepens until the familiar landscape of your village becomes a collection of mysterious shadows and distant points of flickering light. This is when your world truly shrinks to the size of your cottage, when the vast fields and forests that define your daytime existence fade into an unknowable darkness that stretches beyond the reach of your small fire. As the last traces of daylight fade from the western sky, you and your family begin the evening rituals that have remained unchanged for countless generations. These aren't mere habits, but carefully developed strategies for survival, ways of organizing the dangerous hours when cold, darkness, and isolation pose their greatest threats to your household's well-being. Every action has purpose. Every routine serves multiple functions, and nothing is left to chance in a world where a single mistake can have consequences that last until spring. The first priority is securing your animals for the night, a task that requires both physical effort and careful attention to detail. Your ox, that massive and invaluable creature whose strength makes agriculture possible, must be led to its shelter and provided with enough fodder to maintain its body heat through the cold hours ahead. You check the simple wooden structure that serves as its stable, ensuring that loose boards haven't shifted and that the thatch roof remains intact. A sick or injured ox could mean disaster for your family's ability to work the land, so you run your hands over the animal's legs and body one final time, feeling for heat that might indicate injury or illness. The chickens require different but equally important attention. These small, vulnerable birds are easy prey for the foxes, weasels, and other predators that hunt under cover of darkness. You guide them into their coop, a structure that's part fortress and part nest, built with overlapping boards and reinforced with whatever scraps of iron you can afford. The door is secured with a wooden latch that you check twice, because losing even one hen to a nighttime raid would mean fewer eggs for your family and less protein in your winter diet. Your pig, perhaps the most independent of your animals, requires the least direct supervision, but the most careful management. Pigs in your world are semi-wild creatures, intelligent and resourceful enough to find much of their own food, but valuable enough that their loss would be catastrophic. You ensure the animal has access to shelter if it chooses to use it, but you also know that pigs often prefer to sleep outdoors, using their thick bristles and layers of fat to insulate themselves against the cold. As you complete these tasks, you're aware of similar activities taking place throughout the village. The sound of wooden doors closing echoes across the settlement as your neighbours secure their own animals and prepare their households for night. Occasionally, you hear voices calling out brief greetings or warnings. The last human sounds before darkness imposes its own form of isolation on each family. There's comfort in knowing that other people are nearby, pursuing the same routines and facing the same challenges, even when you can't see them. The preparation of your cottage for the night requires its own careful attention to detail. Windows, such as they are, must be shuttered against both cold and the supernatural threats that many believe travel with the darkness. These aren't glass windows, but simple openings covered with wooden shutters or perhaps thin-scraped animal hide that allows some light to filter through during the day. At night, they're sealed as tightly as possible, creating a barrier between your family's warmth and the hostile world outside. The door receives similar attention, its wooden bar dropped into place and checked to ensure it's properly seated. This isn't primarily protection against human threats, though wandering bandits or desperate travelers might pose some danger. More importantly, it's protection against the animals that might be drawn to the warmth and food smells emanating from your cottage. Bears are rare but not unknown in your region, and even smaller predators might pose a threat to your children or your food stores. Inside the cottage, the evening routine centers around the hearth that serves as the focal point of family life. The fire that has burned throughout the day must be carefully managed for the night ahead, provided with enough fuel to maintain some warmth, but not so much that it poses a danger to your thatched roof or wooden walls. Your wife demonstrates the skill that comes from years of experience, banking the coals with ash to slow their burning while ensuring they won't die out completely before morning. The positioning of your family for sleep follows patterns established by both practical necessity and social custom. You and your wife claim the area closest to the fire, not from selfishness, but because your survival is essential to the family's continued existence. Your children arrange themselves according to age and size, with the youngest sleeping between their parents, where they can be monitored most carefully. The baby, still nursing and vulnerable to the cold, remains close to your wife throughout the night. Your animals, those that sleep indoors, find their own designated areas within the cottage. The goats position themselves near the door, their keen senses serving as an early warning system for any disturbances outside. The chickens, if any remain indoors overnight, settle into whatever corner offers the most protection from drafts. Even the family cat, if you're fortunate enough to have one, serves a dual purpose as both pest control and living heating pad, often curling up against the children for mutual warmth. The transition from wakefulness to sleep isn't the quick process that modern people experience when they turn off lights and settle into comfortable beds. Instead, it's a gradual settling that begins with evening prayers and continues through quiet conversations, gentle songs, and the telling of stories that help pass the time until exhaustion finally claims consciousness. These aren't entertainment in the modern sense, but essential elements of family bonding and cultural transmission, ways of sharing knowledge and values that can't be written down because books don't exist in your world. Your wife might tell the children about the saints whose feast days mark the passage of time through the year, or about the practical knowledge they'll need as they grow older. Stories about weather signs, about the behavior of animals, about the proper times for planting and harvesting. Your own contributions might focus on the skills your sons will need to learn, the techniques of ploughing and sowing, the signs that indicate when grain is ready for harvest, the methods for maintaining tools and managing livestock. But not all evening conversation is instructional. There's also time for the gossip and speculation that bind communities together. Quiet discussions about neighbours' affairs, about changes in the weather, about the activities of your Lord and his household. Information travels slowly in your world, often changing significantly as it passes from person to person. But these evening conversations help everyone stay connected to the larger world beyond their immediate family circle. The religious observances that mark the end of each day aren't optional additions to your routine, but essential elements of both spiritual and practical life. Evening prayers serve multiple purposes: offering thanks for the day's survival, requesting protection through the dangerous hours of darkness, and reinforcing the family's connection to the larger community of believers that extends far beyond your small village. These prayers aren't hurried formalities, but serious spiritual exercises that acknowledge both human vulnerability and divine providence. Your children learn these prayers by listening and repetition, gradually memorizing the Latin words they don't understand but accepting their power and importance. The rhythm of prayer becomes as natural as breathing, providing structure and comfort in a world where uncertainty is the only constant. Even when exhaustion makes concentration difficult, the familiar words flow automatically, creating a sense of continuity and safety that helps ease the transition into sleep. The sounds that fill your cottage during the evening hours create their own form of comfort and security. The fire crackles softly as it consumes the carefully rationed fuel. The animals shift and settle in their designated areas, their presence providing both warmth and the reassurance that comes from shared space. Outside, the wind might whisper through the thatch or rattle the wooden shutters, but these sounds are familiar and expected, part of the natural soundtrack of rural life. Occasionally, you might hear more distant sounds that speak to the larger world beyond your cottage walls. The call of an owl hunting in the darkness, the bark of a fox announcing its presence to potential rivals, the rustle of small animals moving through the undergrowth. These sounds don't alarm you because they're part of the expected pattern of nighttime activity, evidence that the natural world continues its cycles even when human activity has ceased. More concerning would be unexpected sounds, the crack of a breaking branch that might indicate the presence of a large animal, voices speaking in unfamiliar dialects that might suggest travelers or worse, the sound of fire bells from another part of the village that would mean immediate danger, requiring community response. But most nights pass without such disturbances, allowing your family to settle into the deep rest that physical exhaustion makes both necessary and inevitable. The quality of sleep in your world differs significantly from what modern people experience. Without artificial lighting to disrupt natural rhythms, your body follows patterns established by millennia of human evolution. Sleep comes in two distinct phases, separated by a period of quiet wakefulness that your ancestors simply accepted as part of the natural order. This isn't insomnia, but a different relationship with rest, one that allows for prayer, contemplation, and the quiet intimacy that helps maintain family bonds. During these midnight hours of wakefulness, you might tend the fire if it's burning too low, check on a child who seems restless, or simply lie quietly beside your wife, sharing the peaceful silence that comes when the day's work is finished and tomorrow's challenges haven't yet begun. These moments of calm are precious in a life filled with constant labor and worry. Brief interludes when you can simply exist without the pressure of tasks that must be completed or problems that must be solved. The cold that seeps through your cottage walls during winter nights isn't the mild discomfort that modern people experience when their heating systems malfunction. It's a serious threat that requires constant vigilance and careful management of your limited resources. Every piece of fuel added to the fire must be weighed against future needs. Every decision about warmth balanced against the knowledge that winter is long and your supplies are finite. Your family's sleeping arrangements reflect this reality, with everyone positioned to share body heat, while maintaining the social proprieties that govern even the most intimate aspects of medieval life. Blankets are precious commodities, woven from wool your family has produced and carefully maintained against the wear that comes from constant use. They're shared rather than individual possessions, layered and arranged to provide maximum warmth with minimum waste. The gradual transition from wakefulness to sleep, interrupted by the natural period of midnight consciousness, continues until the first hints of dawn begin to lighten the eastern sky. This isn't the abrupt awakening imposed by alarm clocks, but a gentle emergence that follows natural rhythms, allowing your body to prepare gradually for another day of physical labor. The rooster's crow that eventually signals morning isn't an interruption, but a confirmation that you've successfully navigated another night and earned another day of life in your challenging but deeply meaningful world. As we near the end of our journey through a single day in your medieval life, we've seen how every hour brings its own challenges and rewards, how survival depends on skill, cooperation, and the accumulated wisdom of countless generations. Your world is harder than ours in many ways, but it's also more directly connected to the fundamental realities of human existence. Work has immediate purpose, family bonds are strengthened by necessity, and the cycles of nature provide both structure and meaning to daily life. The evening prayers that mark the end of this day aren't just religious observance, but acknowledgement of the miracle that is survival in a world where so much can go wrong. As you settle into sleep beside your family, surrounded by the animals that share your shelter and warmed by the fire that has burned throughout this long day, you carry with you the satisfaction of duty fulfilled and the quiet hope that tomorrow will bring its own opportunities for life, work, and the simple happiness that comes from facing challenges alongside those you love. The darkness that envelops your medieval world is complete in ways that modern people struggle to comprehend. When the sun disappears behind the western hills, it takes with it not just light, but the very possibility of extended activity. There are no streetlights to push back the shadows, no electric bulbs to extend the working day, no gentle glow from screens to ease the transition into night. Instead, there is only the profound blackness that has governed human existence since the beginning of time, broken, occasionally, by the pale light of moon and stars, or the precious flicker of flame from hearth and candle. This darkness shapes everything about your evening routine, from the timing of your final meal to the arrangement of your family around the fire. Light is a commodity as precious as food in your world, carefully rationed and never wasted. A single candle represents hours of labor, from the keeping of bees to the collection of their wax, or the rendering of animal fat into tallow that burns with a smoky, uncertain flame. Most evenings, your family makes do with the light from your hearth fire, gathered close around its warm glow, like moths drawn to the only brightness in a world of shadows. The sounds of night in your village create their own landscape of meaning and mystery. Each creak and rustle carries information that your experienced ears can interpret with remarkable accuracy. The distant lowing of cattle settling for the night, the soft shuffle of neighbours securing their own cottages, the occasional bark of a dog alerting the community to some real or imagined threat. These sounds aren't disturbances, but comfort, evidence that your small community continues to function even when darkness makes direct communication impossible. But there are other sounds that command different attention entirely. The howl of wolves in the distant forest, a reminder that the wilderness presses close against your small circle of civilization. The crack of ice forming on water barrels as winter temperatures drop below freezing. The ominous groan of timber under stress, whether from your own cottage settling in the cold, or from some neighbour's building threatening to collapse under the weight of accumulated snow and age. Your children learn to interpret these sounds from infancy, developing the kind of acute hearing that comes only from living in a world where audio cues often provide the first and most reliable information about approaching danger or opportunity. They can distinguish between the normal sounds of animals moving about their business and the different quality of movement that might indicate predators or threats. They know which creaks and groans are normal settling and which might signal structural problems requiring immediate attention. The winter nights are longest and most challenging, stretching from late afternoon to well past dawn of the following day. During these months, your family might spend 14 or 15 hours in the close confines of your cottage, dependent entirely on stored food, carefully hoarded fuel, and each other's company for survival. The psychological pressure of this confinement is as real as the physical challenges, requiring patience, tolerance, and the kind of emotional resilience that comes only from generations of practice. Your wife's role during these long winter evenings extends far beyond the domestic tasks that occupy her daylight hours. She becomes the keeper of family history, the teller of stories that preserve the memory of ancestors and teach important lessons about survival, morality, and community responsibility. Her voice, soft but clear in the firelight, weaves together tales of saints and heroes, practical wisdom about weather and farming, and the kind of gentle instruction that helps children understand their place in the larger world. These stories aren't entertainment in the modern sense, but essential education, the primary means by which knowledge passes from one generation to the next, in a world where books are rarer than precious gems and literacy is confined to a tiny fraction of the population. Through repeated telling, children learn which plants are safe to eat and which are poisonous, which signs in the sky predict good weather and which warn of storms, which behaviours please God and which invite divine punishment. The religious dimensions of evening life in your cottage aren't separate from the practical concerns, but deeply integrated with them. Your prayers don't just ask for spiritual guidance, but for protection against very real physical dangers. You pray for good weather that will allow tomorrow's work to proceed smoothly. You pray for the health of your animals, knowing that their illness or death could mean disaster for your family. You pray for the safety of your children through the night, acknowledging the fragility of young life in a world where infant mortality remains tragically high. The Latin words of formal prayers mix with heartfelt petitions in your own dialect, creating a personal conversation with the divine that acknowledges both the grandeur of God and the immediate needs of your household. These prayers aren't hurried formalities, but serious communications that might determine whether your family prospers or suffers in the days and weeks to come. Faith in your world isn't abstract theology, but practical necessity, the foundation that makes endurance possible when circumstances seem overwhelming. As the night deepens and conversation gradually gives way to drowsiness, your family begins the careful process of arranging yourselves for sleep. This isn't the simple matter of climbing into individual beds that modern people take for granted, but a complex negotiation of space, warmth, and social propriety that must be managed within the confines of your single room. Everyone has their designated area, determined by age, gender, and family hierarchy, but these boundaries must be flexible enough to accommodate the practical demands of staying warm through the long, cold hours ahead. Your youngest children sleep closest to the fire, where the warmth is greatest, but where adult supervision is also most constant. The risk of accidental burns or smoke inhalation means that someone must always remain partially alert, ready to respond if a child rolls too close to the flames or if the fire begins to burn too hot or too low. Your wife typically takes primary responsibility for this midnight vigilance. Her maternal instincts finely tune to detect problems, even while dozing. The baby sleeps between you and your wife, protected by your combined body heat and carefully monitored throughout the night. Infant care in your world requires constant attention, not just because of the emotional bonds between parent and child, but because the survival rate for children under 2 years old remains heartbreakingly low. Every night that a baby survives represents a small victory against odds that modern parents would find unimaginable. Your older children learn to sleep quietly and still, understanding that restless movement not only disturbs others, but wastes precious body heat that everyone depends upon for survival. They've been taught from early childhood to control their bodily functions through the night, minimizing the disruptions that would require someone to venture outside into the dangerous cold and darkness. When nature absolutely demands attention, chamber pots serve the purpose, though their use is carefully managed to avoid offensive odors in the confined space. The animals that share your cottage during winter nights aren't just sources of warmth, but active participants in the household's nighttime routine. Your goats position themselves near the door, their acute senses serving as an early warning system for any disturbances outside. Their ability to detect approaching predators or human threats far exceeds your own, and you've learned to interpret their behavior as a reliable indicator of safety or danger. The chickens, if any, remain indoors overnight, settle into whatever corners offer the most protection from drafts and predators. Their soft clucking and occasional movement provide a gentle soundtrack to the evening, but any sudden alarm calls would immediately alert the entire household to potential threats. Even in sleep, these birds remain vigilant, their survival instincts finely tuned by generations of evolution and selective breeding. The quality of rest you achieve during these winter nights differs fundamentally from modern sleep patterns. Without artificial lighting to disrupt natural circadian rhythms, your body follows ancient patterns that divide the night into distinct phases. You typically fall into deep sleep shortly after dark, then wake naturally during the midnight hours for a period of quiet consciousness before returning to sleep until dawn. This pattern isn't insomnia, but the natural human sleep cycle, one that allows for prayer, contemplation, and the kind of intimate family communication that helps maintain emotional bonds during long periods of physical confinement. During these midnight hours of wakefulness, you might tend the fire if it's burning too low, adding just enough fuel to maintain warmth without wasting your carefully hoarded wood supply. You might check on your children, ensuring that blankets remain properly arranged and that no one has developed the kind of fever that could signal serious illness. Most often, you simply lie quietly in the darkness, listening to the familiar sounds of your household, and feeling grateful for another day survived and another night of protection from the dangers that lurk beyond your threshold. The conversations that sometimes occur during these midnight interludes are among the most intimate and important communications in your family's life. Away from the distractions of daily labor and the presence of neighbors, you and your wife might discuss concerns about your children's health or development, plans for the following day's work, or worries about your family's food supplies lasting through the winter. These quiet exchanges, conducted in whispers to avoid waking the children, help maintain the emotional connection that makes survival possible in such challenging circumstances. Your children, when they wake during these midnight hours, learn to lie still and quiet, understanding instinctively that nighttime is for rest and recovery, rather than activity or conversation. They might listen to their parents' whispered discussions, absorbing information about family concerns and adult responsibilities that helps prepare them for their own future roles. The darkness provides a kind of intimacy that daylight never allows, creating opportunities for learning and bonding that are impossible during the busy hours of productive work. The gradual transition back into sleep follows its own natural rhythm, with family members settling into deeper rest as the night progresses toward dawn. This second sleep phase is typically more restorative than the first, allowing bodies worn down by physical labor to recover enough strength for another day of demanding work. The complete darkness and relative quiet of the medieval night provide ideal conditions for this recovery, free from the artificial stimulation that disrupts modern sleep patterns. As dawn approaches, your body begins its natural preparation for wakefulness, responding to subtle changes in temperature and air pressure that signal the approaching sunrise. This isn't the jarring awakening imposed by alarm clocks, but a gentle emergence that allows your nervous system to adjust gradually to the demands of consciousness. The rooster's crow, when it finally comes, confirms what your body already knows, that another night has passed successfully and another day of opportunity and challenge awaits. The morning routine that follows will repeat the patterns established over countless previous days, But each dawn brings its own particular combination of weather, seasonal changes, and unexpected developments that require adaptation and problem solving. Your survival depends not just on following established routines, but on remaining flexible enough to respond to new circumstances while maintaining the core activities that keep your household functioning. The fire that has sustained your family through the night must be carefully tended back to full life, its coals stirred and fed with kindling until flames dance once again in the hearth. This daily resurrection of light and warmth from the apparent death of banked embers carries deep symbolic meaning in your world, representing hope, renewal, and the continuation of life, despite the challenges that darkness and cold impose upon human existence. Your family's emergence from sleep follows its own careful choreography, with each person taking on their designated morning responsibilities without the need for extensive discussion or coordination. These patterns have been established through years of practice and necessity, creating an efficiency that allows maximum productivity with minimum wasted motion or energy. Everyone understands their role and fulfills it automatically, creating the kind of smooth cooperation that makes survival possible in such demanding circumstances. The day that stretches ahead will bring its own combination of routine tasks and unexpected challenges, but the successful completion of another night provides confidence that your family possesses the skills, resources, and resilience needed to meet whatever difficulties may arise. Each dawn represents both an ending and a beginning, the completion of one cycle in the eternal rhythm of medieval life, and the commencement of another opportunity to work, survive, and perhaps even prosper in your demanding but deeply meaningful world. As you step outside into the crisp morning air, the village around you is already stirring with the quiet efficiency that marks rural life. Smoke rises from a dozen chimneys, each one representing a family beginning their own daily struggle for survival. The sounds are familiar and comforting: the distant lowing of cattle, the creak of wooden cartwheels on frozen ground, the soft murmur of voices as neighbours exchange brief greetings over fence posts and garden gates. Your nearest neighbour, Thomas the miller, waves from across the narrow lane that separates your properties. His mill wheel has been turning since before dawn, grinding the grain that will become bread for half the village. The steady rhythm of the grinding stones provides a constant backdrop to village life, a sound so familiar that you notice it only when it stops. Thomas looks tired this morning, his face bearing the lines that come from years of rising before the sun to serve his community's needs. The village itself is small by any standard, perhaps 20 families scattered across a landscape that extends no more than a few miles in any direction. But within this small space exists a complete world, with its own economy, social structure, and web of relationships that determine everything from who marries whom to who gets the best strips of land when they become available. You know every person in this community, their strengths and weaknesses, their family histories stretching back generations, their debts and obligations, both financial and social. The centre of your world isn't the manor house that sits on the hill overlooking the village, though that impressive stone structure certainly dominates the landscape with its thick walls and narrow windows. Instead, the true heart of community life is the small wooden church that stands at the crossroads where the main paths through the village intersect. This modest building, with its simple wooden cross and thatched roof, represents not just spiritual authority, but the focal point around which all village activities revolve. Sunday Mass isn't optional in your world. It's the weekly gathering that reinforces social bonds, communicates important information, and reminds everyone of their place in the divine order that governs all existence. But the Church's influence extends far beyond Sunday morning. It marks the passage of time through feast days and fasting periods, provides the moral framework that guides daily decisions, and offers the only formal education available to village children through the patient instruction of the parish priest. Father Benedict has served this community for nearly 2 decades, arriving as a young man full of theological learning and gradually adapting to the practical realities of rural ministry. He's learned to speak the local dialect rather than insisting on Latin for everything, to understand the agricultural cycle that determines when people can attend services, and to balance the church's demands for tithes and offerings against the harsh reality of peasant poverty. His small cottage beside the church serves as school, courthouse, and counselling centre for problems both spiritual and mundane. The relationship between your village and the manor house on the hill defines much of your daily existence, though direct contact with Lord Geoffrey and his household remains relatively rare. Most of your interactions with manorial authority come through the bailiff, a man whose job involves collecting rents, organising communal labour projects, and ensuring that the Lord's interests are protected in all village affairs. The bailiff walks a difficult line between serving his master's demands and maintaining workable relationships with the peasant families whose cooperation he requires. This morning, as you make your way toward the fields for another day of autumn preparation, you encounter the bailiff making his rounds with his ever-present ledger and calculating expression. He nods politely, but doesn't stop to chat, his mind focused on the endless details of estate management that occupy his waking hours. Behind his formal demeanour, you sense the constant pressure he faces from above to maximise productivity and revenue while managing the human reality of families struggling to survive on marginal resources. The feudal system that governs your life isn't experienced as abstract political theory, but as a series of practical obligations and relationships that shape every aspect of daily existence. You owe labour service to the manor, typically 3 days per week during busy seasons, working the Lord's domain land before you can tend to your own strips. This arrangement isn't necessarily oppressive, though it certainly limits your freedom, because it also provides security and protection in a world where both are precious commodities. Your strips of land scattered across the village fields aren't owned in the modern sense, but held according to ancient customs that guarantee your family's right to work them as long as you fulfill your obligations. These customs have the force of law, passed down through generations and enforced by the community itself, rather than by written contracts or formal legal proceedings. When disputes arise, they're settled in the manor court, where customary law and local precedent carry more weight than royal statute or ecclesiastical decree. The three-field system that organises agricultural life in your village represents centuries of accumulated wisdom about sustainable farming in your particular climate and soil conditions. One field lies fallow each year, allowing the soil to recover while providing pasture for the community's animals. The other 2 fields are planted with different crops, typically grains in one and legumes or vegetables in the other, following rotations that maintain soil fertility without the fertilizers that won't be invented for centuries to come. Working within this system requires constant cooperation with your neighbours, since individual strips are scattered throughout each field and many tasks require coordinated effort. Ploughing happens according to community schedules, with the village's oxen working systematically across each field in turn. Harvest time brings the entire community together in a race against weather and time, with everyone contributing labour to bring in crops before autumn. Rains can ruin them in the fields. The tools you use for this work are simple but effective, designed by generations of experience and refined through countless seasons of use. Your plough is wooden with an iron share, pulled by the ox you share with 2 other families. Your scythe for cutting grain has a curved wooden handle worn smooth by your father's hands and your grandfather's before him. The flail you use for threshing consists of 2 wooden sticks connected by leather thongs, a design so efficient that it will remain essentially unchanged for centuries to come. But tools are only as good as the knowledge that guides their use, and this knowledge represents your most valuable inheritance from previous generations. You know exactly when to plant each crop based on subtle signs in weather and soil that no calendar could capture. You can judge the ripeness of grain by the sound it makes when wind moves through the stalks. You understand which fields drain well after heavy rains, and which ones hold moisture longer during dry spells. This agricultural wisdom isn't written down anywhere because books are beyond the reach of people like you. And literacy itself is a skill possessed by perhaps one person in 50 throughout the broader population. Instead, knowledge passes from parent to child through demonstration, observation, and the kind of patient repetition that ensures nothing essential is lost between generations. Your children learn by watching and helping, gradually taking on more responsibility as they demonstrate competence with simpler tasks. The seasonal rhythm that governs your work creates its own calendar, more reliable and meaningful than any formal dating system. Spring ploughing marks the true beginning of the agricultural year, when frozen ground finally softens enough to accept the plough, and the risk of late frost diminishes enough to justify planting. Summer brings the intense labor of cultivation, weeding, and pest control that determines whether crops will thrive or fail. Autumn harvest represents the culmination of the year's work and the foundation for winter survival. But autumn also brings its own particular challenges and opportunities, many of which occupy your attention during these crisp October days. Root vegetables must be harvested and properly stored before hard frost damages them in the ground. Apples and pears need to be gathered, some for immediate consumption and others for preservation through drying or brewing into cider. Nuts must be collected from the forest before squirrels and other animals claim them entirely. The preservation of food for winter consumption requires skills that every household must master, because there are no alternatives when fresh food becomes unavailable. Your wife knows exactly how to layer apples in straw so they'll keep for months without rotting, how to dry beans and peas so they remain edible throughout the winter, how to salt meat so it will last until spring. These techniques aren't optional conveniences, but essential survival skills that mean the difference between adequate nutrition and slow starvation during the lean months. Your cottage's storage areas reflect this emphasis on preservation and careful resource management. Root vegetables lie buried in sand in the small cellar beneath your floor, protected from both freezing and decay. Dried herbs hang from the rafters, their preserved essence ready to flavor the monotonous winter diet of grain porridge and preserved meat. Clay pots hold rendered fat that will provide both cooking medium and precious calories when fresh food becomes scarce. The work of autumn preparation extends beyond food to encompass all the resources your family will need to survive until spring returns. Firewood must be cut, split, and stacked in quantities that seem enormous but will prove barely adequate when winter cold settles over the landscape. Wool from your small flock of sheep must be processed into thread and then woven into cloth for clothing and blankets. Tools require maintenance and repair, while weather still permits outdoor work, and before winter makes such tasks impossible. Your wife's work during these autumn days focuses heavily on textile production, the time-consuming process that transforms raw wool into the clothing your family needs. She begins by washing the fleeces in the stream that runs past the village, using harsh soap made from animal fat and wood ash to remove the lanolin and dirt that accumulate during the sheep's outdoor life. The clean wool must then be combed to align the fibers and remove any remaining debris before it can be spun into thread. The spinning itself requires hours of patient work at the wheel, transforming loose wool fibers into the strong thread that forms the foundation of all textile production. Your wife's hands move automatically through the familiar motions, her attention free to focus on other matters, while her fingers guide the wool through its transformation. This is work that can be done while watching children, tending cooking, or participating in the conversations that help maintain community bonds during long winter evenings. Weaving the thread into cloth requires even more specialized equipment and skill, using the large wooden loom that occupies a significant portion of your cottage's limited space. Your wife learned these techniques from her mother, who learned them from her own mother in an unbroken chain of knowledge that stretches back to the dawn of civilization. The patterns she weaves aren't decorative arts, but practical necessities, designed to create cloth that will wear well, shed water effectively, and provide maximum warmth with minimum weight. The clothing that emerges from this process bears little resemblance to modern garments in either style or construction. Your tunics are simple rectangles of cloth with holes cut for head and arms, practical rather than fashionable. Your wife's dresses follow similar principles of simplicity and durability, designed to last for years with proper care and occasional mending. Colours come from natural dyes extracted from plants, minerals and insects, creating the muted browns, greys and occasional reds that characterise peasant clothing. But clothing represents only one aspect of the textile production that occupies much of your wife's time and attention. Blankets, sacks for storing grain, rope for countless purposes, even the simple cloth bags that hold your family's few personal possessions all emerge from the same basic process of spinning and weaving. Nothing is wasted in this system because waste represents resources that your family simply cannot afford to lose. The children's roles in these autumn preparations reflect their gradual integration into the adult world of work and responsibility. Your eldest son, now approaching his 10th birthday, can handle many of the simpler tasks associated with food preservation and storage. He knows how to arrange vegetables in the root cellar, how to stack firewood for proper drying, how to help with the threshing that separates grain from chaff. These aren't just chores assigned to keep him busy, but essential training for the adult responsibilities he'll assume in just a few more years. Your daughter's education focuses on the domestic skills she'll need as a wife and mother, learning from her mother's patient instruction and constant example. She can already spin thread on a simple spindle, though she hasn't yet developed the coordination needed for the more complex spinning wheel. She helps with cooking, food preservation, and the countless small tasks that keep a household functioning smoothly. Her marriage, still years in the future, will depend as much on these practical skills as on any considerations of affection or compatibility. Even your youngest children contribute according to their abilities, gathering kindling for the fire, collecting eggs from the chickens, helping to sort grain during threshing. These tasks aren't burden but preparation for adult life, ways of learning the skills and developing the work habits that will ensure their survival in a world that offers few second chances for those who fail to master essential competencies. The community aspects of autumn work create opportunities for social interaction that help offset the isolation that winter will inevitably bring. Neighbours help each other with tasks that require more hands than a single family can provide, sharing both labour and knowledge in ways that benefit everyone involved. The harvest of communal areas, such as the village common, where everyone's animals graze, requires coordinated effort that reinforces social bonds while accomplishing necessary work. These cooperative work sessions often extend into the evening, with families sharing simple meals and engaging in the conversations that maintain community cohesion. News travels slowly in your world, often taking weeks or months to reach your isolated village. But these gatherings provide opportunities to share what information is available and to discuss its implications for local affairs. War, politics, and economic changes in the wider world affect your community indirectly but significantly, influencing everything from tax demands to the availability of manufactured goods. Religious observances during autumn focus on thanksgiving for the harvest and prayers for protection through the approaching winter. The church calendar provides structure for these observances, with specific feast days dedicated to agricultural saints and seasonal concerns. These aren't just spiritual exercises, but community events that bring everyone together for shared worship, communal meals, and the reinforcement of social hierarchies that govern village life. The approaching winter looms over all these autumn activities like a shadow that grows longer with each passing day. Everyone understands that survival through the cold months depends on careful preparation now, while weather still permits outdoor work, and while the harvest's bounty provides resources for preservation and storage. There's an urgency to these tasks that goes beyond simple efficiency, because failure to complete essential preparations could mean genuine hardship or even death before spring returns. Your family's survival strategy for winter involves not just material preparation, but psychological readiness for months of confinement, limited food, and the constant threat of disaster. The cottage that seems adequate during summer's warmth will become both fortress and prison when snow blocks the paths, and cold makes extended outdoor activity dangerous. Everyone must learn to tolerate close quarters, limited privacy, and the kind of enforced intimacy that can either strengthen family bonds or create unbearable tension. The stories, songs, and games that will occupy long winter evenings require their own form of preparation, as your wife reviews the traditional tales that preserve community history and moral instruction. These aren't just entertainment, but essential elements of cultural transmission, ways of passing knowledge and values to the next generation during the months when outdoor activity becomes impossible. The ability to tell these stories well, to engage children's attention and imagination during the darkest days of winter, represents a crucial survival skill in its own right. As the sun begins its descent toward the western horizon on this autumn day, painting the sky in shades of gold and crimson, you feel the deep satisfaction that comes from productive work completed and essential preparations advanced. Tomorrow will bring its own tasks and challenges, but tonight you can rest in the knowledge that your family is one step closer to successfully weathering another winter. The rhythm of this life, demanding but predictable, provides its own form of security in a world where change often brings catastrophe rather than improvement. The evening meal that awaits you in your cottage will be simple but nourishing, prepared from ingredients your family has produced through months of careful labour. The fire that warms the food and lights the room burns wood you cut with your own hands. The bread comes from grain you planted, tended, and harvested according to knowledge passed down through generations of your ancestors. This direct connection between effort and reward, between work and survival, creates a sense of purpose and accomplishment that no abstract achievement could match. As darkness settles over your village and families gather around their hearths for another evening of shared warmth and quiet conversation, you carry with you the accumulated wisdom of countless generations who have faced similar challenges and found ways not just to survive, but to create meaning and community in the midst of hardship. Your life may be difficult by modern standards, but it's also deeply rooted in traditions and relationships that provide stability and purpose in an uncertain world. The prayers that will end this day aren't just religious obligations, but heartfelt expressions of gratitude for survival and hope for continued protection. In your world, where death lurks behind every illness, accident, or failed harvest, each successful day represents a small victory worth celebrating. As you settle beside your family around the flickering fire, you know that tomorrow will bring its own challenges and rewards in the eternal cycle of peasant life. But tonight, you are warm, fed, and surrounded by those you love most in all the world. The transition from autumn's final preparations into winter's grip doesn't announce itself with fanfare or formal ceremony. Instead, it creeps in gradually, like an unwelcome guest who arrives quietly and then refuses to leave. One morning, you wake to find frost coating the inside of your shutters, and you know that the season of endurance has begun. The air carries a different quality now, sharp and brittle, promising months of cold that will test every preparation you've made and every skill you've learned. Your breath mists as you rise from your straw mattress, the cottage's single room now feeling smaller and more confining than it did during autumn's busy days. The fire that burned through the night has settled into glowing embers, but even this carefully tended warmth struggles against the cold that seeps through every crack and crevice in your walls. Winter doesn't respect the boundaries between inside and outside that seemed so solid during warmer months. It finds its way into everything, making itself at home in places where it's neither wanted nor welcome. The morning routine now requires additional layers of planning and preparation. Water left in containers overnight has formed a thin skin of ice that must be broken before you can wash your face or prepare the morning meal. The animals huddle closer together, their warm breath creating clouds of vapor that hang in the still air like visible proof of life persisting despite the cold. Even the chickens, normally active and vocal, move with the sluggish reluctance of creatures conserving every bit of energy for survival. Your first task each winter morning is assessing what the night has brought and what the day might demand. You step outside briefly, your feet crunching on frost-hardened ground, to check on the animals and gauge the weather's mood. The sky might be clear and brilliant, promising a day of bitter cold but useful sunlight, or it might be heavy with the grey clouds that threaten snow. Each possibility requires different strategies, different priorities for the day's limited opportunities for outdoor work. The cattle need special attention now, their large bodies requiring more fodder to maintain the body heat that keeps them alive through winter's assault. You check their shelter carefully, ensuring that the wooden walls remain intact and that the roof continues to shed moisture rather than collecting it. A sick or injured animal during winter represents a catastrophe that could doom your family's chances of surviving until spring, so every sign of distress or discomfort receives immediate attention. The storage areas that seemed so well stocked during autumn's abundance now begin their slow decline towards spring's scarcity. Each meal drawn from your carefully preserved supplies brings you one step closer to the lean times that arrive with winter's end, when old food runs out but new crops haven't yet emerged from the soil. Your wife manages these resources with the skill of a military quartermaster, calculating portions and rationing supplies with mathematical precision that determines whether your family will eat adequately or go hungry. The grain that forms the foundation of your winter diet requires careful handling to prevent spoilage or pest infestation during the long months of storage. You check the containers regularly, looking for signs of moisture that could cause mold or evidence of mice that might be stealing precious calories from your family's mouths. Every grain lost to carelessness or poor storage represents food that won't be available when hunger becomes a constant companion rather than an occasional visitor. Your wife's work during these winter days shifts toward the indoor tasks that can be accomplished by firelight and within the confines of your cottage. The spinning wheel turns constantly, transforming stored wool into the thread that will become next year's clothing. Her hands move with automatic precision, guided by decades of practice that allow her to work productively even when her attention focuses on other matters. The steady rhythm of the wheel provides a comforting soundtrack to winter days, evidence of progress and productivity, even when outdoor work becomes impossible. The weaving that follows spinning requires even more concentration and skill, as your wife guides threads through complex patterns that create cloth strong enough to withstand years of hard use. The loom dominates one corner of your cottage, its wooden frame holding the growing fabric that will eventually become tunics for your sons or shifts for your daughters. This work can't be rushed or hurried because mistakes in weaving create weaknesses that will fail at the worst possible moments, leaving someone without adequate protection against cold or weather. Your children's education continues through these winter months, though it takes different forms than the outdoor lessons of spring and summer. They learn the stories that preserve your family's history and your community's values, tales passed down through generations that teach both practical wisdom and moral guidance. These aren't just entertainment to pass long evenings, but essential cultural transmission, ensuring that important knowledge survives from one generation to the next, even when books and formal education remain beyond reach. The skills your children learn during winter's confinement will serve them throughout their lives, from the practical abilities needed for household management to the social graces required for community harmony. Your daughter learns not just how to spin and weave, but how to manage a household's resources during times of scarcity. Your son discovers not just how to care for animals, but how to make difficult decisions about which creatures to keep and which to slaughter when food becomes scarce. The religious observances that mark winter's progress provide structure and meaning to months that might otherwise seem like an endless struggle against cold and hunger. The church calendar divides the season into manageable segments, each with its own festivals, fasting periods, and spiritual focus. Christmas brings a brief celebration that brightens the darkest time of year, while Candlemas marks the first tentative signs that winter's grip might eventually loosen. These religious celebrations aren't just spiritual exercises, but community events that bring neighbours together during the season when isolation poses its own threats to survival. The shared meals, however simple, remind everyone that they're part of something larger than their individual struggles. The familiar rituals provide comfort and continuity in a world where change usually brings hardship rather than improvement. The stories shared during these winter gatherings preserve not just entertainment, but essential information about survival, community relations, and the natural world. You learn which signs predict the severity of winter weather, which remedies help combat the illnesses that flourish in cold, confined conditions, which strategies work best for managing limited resources through extended periods of scarcity. This knowledge doesn't come from books or formal instruction, but from the accumulated experience of generations who have faced similar challenges. The illnesses that stalk your community during winter months require constant vigilance and the kind of practical medical knowledge that every household must possess. A simple cold can become a life-threatening condition when combined with malnutrition, exposure, or the stress of living in cramped, poorly ventilated conditions. Your wife maintains a collection of dried herbs and traditional remedies, knowledge passed down from her mother and grandmother about which plants ease coughs, reduce fevers, or help restore strength to bodies weakened by winter's demands. The psychological challenges of winter confinement test your family's emotional resilience as much as the physical hardships test your material preparations. Spending months in close quarters with the same people, breathing the same air, eating the same limited foods, creates tensions that must be managed carefully to prevent conflicts that could destroy the cooperation essential for survival. Everyone learns to control their tempers, moderate their demands, and find ways to maintain personal space even when privacy becomes impossible. The work that continues through winter's darkest months maintains both physical productivity and mental health, providing purpose and accomplishment when the outside world offers little opportunity for meaningful activity. Your tools require maintenance and repair during the long months when they're not needed for field work. Baskets need mending, leather goods require conditioning, and wooden implements must be shaped and smoothed to prepare for spring's demanding schedule. The planning that occupies winter evenings shapes the strategies your family will employ when warm weather returns and agricultural work resumes. You discuss which fields to plant with which crops, considering soil conditions, weather patterns, and the lessons learned from previous year's successes and failures. These conversations aren't idle speculation, but serious preparation for decisions that will determine your family's prosperity or hardship in the months to come. The social dynamics of your village community evolve during winter's isolation, as families rely more heavily on stored resources and traditional relationships become more important for survival. Neighbours who might compete during busy seasons now depend on each other for assistance when emergencies arise. The family whose cottage catches fire needs immediate help from everyone nearby, because individual survival depends on community cooperation in ways that become starkly apparent when options become limited. The news that reaches your village during winter months travels slowly and often arrives distorted by multiple retellings, but it still provides essential information about the wider world that affects your local circumstances. Wars, political changes, and economic disruptions in distant places eventually influence everything from tax demands to to the availability of manufactured goods. Understanding these larger patterns helps your community prepare for changes that might seem remote, but will eventually reach even your isolated village. The dreams and aspirations that sustain your family through winter's hardships aren't grand ambitions for wealth or status, but modest hopes for survival, health, and the continuation of traditions that give meaning to daily struggles. You dream of spring's return, of successful harvests, of children growing strong and healthy despite the challenges they face. These hopes provide the emotional fuel that makes endurance possible when circumstances seem overwhelming. The gradual lengthening of days that marks winter's slow retreat brings the first tentative signs that survival might be possible. That spring will eventually return despite the cold that still grips your world. You notice these changes in subtle ways: the slightly earlier arrival of dawn, the marginally later arrival of darkness, the occasional bird song that suggests life continues even when everything seems frozen and dormant. These signs aren't dramatic or immediate, but they provide hope that sustains your family through the final months of winter's trial. The preparations for spring that begin even during winter's depths reflect the forward thinking that characterizes successful peasant families. Seeds must be sorted and protected, tools prepared for the intensive use they'll receive once ploughing season arrives, and plans made for the coordinated community effort that planting requires. This preparation isn't premature optimism, but practical necessity, because spring's arrival demands immediate action from families ready to take advantage of brief windows of opportunity. As we continue our journey through the rhythms of medieval peasant life, we see how winter represents not just a season of hardship, but a crucial period that tests and strengthens the bonds between family members, neighbours, and community. The skills developed during these months of challenge, the relationships deepened by shared struggle, and the wisdom gained through surviving adversity all contribute to the resilience that makes continued existence possible in a world where margin for error remains permanently narrow. The evening routines that mark the end of each winter day carry special significance, representing small victories in the ongoing battle against cold, hunger, and despair. Each successful day survived brings your family one step closer to spring's promise of renewal and opportunity. As you settle around your fire for another night of shared warmth and quiet conversation, you carry with you the knowledge that countless generations before you have faced similar challenges and found ways not just to endure, but to maintain the human dignity and community bonds that make survival meaningful rather than merely biological. The fire crackles softly as evening settles over your medieval world, casting dancing shadows across the rough wooden walls of your cottage. This is the hour when the day's labours give way to something deeper, something that connects your family not just to each other, but to the vast tapestry of belief that governs every aspect of existence in your time. In our modern world, we might think of religion as something practiced on weekends or during moments of crisis. But in your medieval life, faith isn't a separate compartment of experience. It's the very air you breathe. Your day began with a whispered prayer of thanksgiving for surviving another night, and it will end with supplications for protection through the hours of darkness ahead. But between these bookends of dawn and dusk, countless smaller observances weave through your routine like threads in a tapestry. You cross yourself before eating, mutter brief invocations when beginning difficult tasks, and offer silent gratitude when small mercies present themselves. These aren't conscious decisions, but reflexive responses, as natural as breathing in a world where the boundary between earthly and divine remains permanently thin. The church that stands at your village crossroads isn't just a building where you gather on Sundays. It's the spiritual centre around which your entire world revolves. Its bell tower marking the passage of time more reliably than any sundial or water clock. The bells that ring for morning prayers, midday devotions, and evening vespers don't just call the faithful to worship. They provide the rhythm that structures daily life, telling farmers when to break for meals reminding craftsmen of their obligation to pause for prayer and warning travellers that darkness approaches and they should seek shelter soon. Father Benedict moves through your village like a figure from another realm, his black robes marking him as someone who exists partially in this world and partially in the next. He alone can read the Latin texts that contain divine wisdom. He alone can transform bread and wine into the body and blood of Christ, and he alone possesses the authority to forgive sins or condemn souls to eternal damnation. This power makes him both revered and feared, a man whose blessing can ensure a good harvest, but whose curse might bring disaster upon an entire family. The prayers you offer aren't the polite requests that modern people might direct toward a benevolent deity. They're urgent negotiations with powers that hold absolute control over your fate. You pray for rain when drought threatens your crops, but not too much rain that might rot the grain in the fields. You pray for your children's health in a world where half of all babies die before their 5th birthday. You pray for protection from the bandits who roam the roads, the diseases that spread through villages like wildfire, and the countless accidents that can transform a prosperous family into beggars overnight. The saints who populate your spiritual landscape aren't distant historical figures, but immediate, accessible advocates who understand specific human needs because they once shared them. Saint Isidore protects farmers and their animals, making him particularly relevant to your daily concerns. Saint Barbara guards against lightning strikes and sudden death, crucial protection in a world where both threats remain constant. Saint Apollonia eases the agony of toothaches in an age before dentistry, while Saint Blay protects throats from the diseases that kill through slow strangulation. These saints aren't just names recited in formal prayers, but personal friends who receive regular consultation about practical problems. When your cow falls ill, you might promise Saint Isidore a portion of your next harvest if he intercedes for the animal's recovery. When your daughter develops a fever, you bargain with Saint Barbara, offering to name your next child in her honor if she restores the girl's health. These aren't abstract theological exercises, but concrete business transactions with spiritual beings who possess real power to influence earthly events. The religious calendar that governs your year provides structure that goes far beyond simple timekeeping. Advent's 4 weeks of preparation leading to Christmas create a season of anticipation that brightens winter's darkest period. Lent's 40 days of fasting and penance prepare both body and soul for Easter's celebration of resurrection and renewal. The countless feast days scattered throughout the year honour specific saints while providing welcome breaks from the relentless routine of agricultural labour. But these religious observances aren't just spiritual exercises. They're also social events that strengthen community bonds and reinforce the hierarchies that maintain order in your world. The wealthy display their status through elaborate donations to the church, expensive candles burned during services, and rich clothing worn to demonstrate God's favour. The poor show their devotion through attendance, attention, and the small offerings that represent significant sacrifices from families living on the edge of subsistence. The concept of sin in your world extends far beyond the major transgressions that modern people might recognise. Pride, the deadliest of all sins, can manifest in something as simple as refusing to acknowledge your social superior's authority or taking credit for successes that properly belong to God. Gluttony isn't just overeating, but consuming more than your station warrants, or eating meat during forbidden periods. Sloth encompasses not just laziness, but failing to fulfill the obligations that your position in society demands. The confessional provides regular opportunities to cleanse your soul of these accumulated transgressions, but it also serves as a social control mechanism that reinforces proper behaviour. Father Benedict knows everyone's secrets, everyone's weaknesses, everyone's private struggles with temptation. This knowledge makes him a powerful figure in village politics, someone whose opinion can influence everything from marriage arrangements to business partnerships. The superstitions that interweave with official church doctrine create a complex spiritual landscape where Christian saints coexist with older beliefs about luck, omens, and protective rituals. You might wear a small cross around your neck for divine protection, while also carrying a rabbit's foot for good fortune. You observe the church's prohibition against working on Sundays, while also avoiding certain tasks on days when folklore suggests they'll bring bad luck. The afterlife that awaits you isn't the simple heaven or hell dichotomy that later Christianity will emphasize, but a more complex system that includes purgatory, a middle realm where souls undergo purification before achieving paradise. This doctrine has profound practical implications because it means your fate after death isn't permanently sealed at the moment of your final breath. Prayers offered by living relatives, masses said in your memory, and charitable donations made in your name can all help reduce your time in purgatorial suffering. This belief system creates a spiritual economy where the living maintain ongoing relationships with the dead through regular offerings and observances. You remember deceased family members not just with grief, but with active assistance, contributing what you can to shorten their spiritual suffering and speed their journey toward eternal bliss. The poor widow who spends her last copper coin on a candle for her husband's soul isn't being wasteful, but making a sound investment in his eternal welfare. The church building itself serves multiple functions beyond religious worship. It's the community meeting hall where important announcements are made and disputes are settled. It's the schoolhouse where a few privileged children learn to read Latin and perhaps write their own names. It's the courthouse where Father Benedict mediates conflicts and pronounces judgments based on canonical law and local custom. And it's the sanctuary where criminals can claim temporary protection from secular justice by grasping the altar and declaring themselves under God's protection. The holy days that punctuate your year provide welcome relief from the grinding routine of agricultural labor, but they also impose their own obligations and restrictions. Christmas brings joy and celebration, but it also requires expensive gifts for the church and special foods that strain your family's resources. Easter demands new clothes if possible, elaborate decorations for your cottage, and participation in processions that might last for hours under uncomfortable conditions. The pilgrimage tradition offers the only legitimate excuse for travel beyond your immediate area, but these spiritual journeys require careful planning and considerable expense. A trip to visit a saint's shrine might take weeks or months, during which time your family must survive without your labor, while also providing for your needs on the road. Yet pilgrims return with spiritual benefits that justify these costs, bringing back holy relics, blessed objects, and the kind of spiritual merit that provides protection against future misfortunes. The religious art that decorates your church serves an educational function in a world where most people cannot read. The painted scenes on the walls tell biblical stories, illustrate the lives of saints, and depict the torments awaiting sinners in hell. These images aren't just decoration, but teaching tools that help illiterate congregations understand complex theological concepts through visual narrative. The music that accompanies religious services creates an emotional atmosphere that words alone cannot achieve. The plainchant that echoes through your church during mass transports, earthly minds toward heavenly contemplation, while the hymns sung during feast days express joy and celebration that mere speaking cannot convey. Even those who cannot understand Latin can follow the emotional arc of these musical prayers, participating in worship through feeling rather than comprehension. The tithing system that supports your church requires every household to contribute 1/10 of its production to religious purposes, a substantial burden for families already struggling to survive. But this isn't just taxation disguised as religious obligation. It's also insurance against spiritual and temporal disasters, an investment in divine protection that pays dividends in this world as well as the next. The family that fails to pay its full tithe might find itself blamed when crops fail or animals sicken. The religious festivals that mark your year provide opportunities for social interaction that help maintain community cohesion during the long months when agricultural work keeps families isolated on their scattered holdings. These gatherings allow young people to meet potential spouses, enable adults to conduct business and exchange news, and give children chances to play with companions they might not see for weeks at a time. The moral instruction that flows from religious teaching shapes every aspect of daily behavior, from the way you treat your animals to the honesty you show in business dealings. The Golden Rule isn't just spiritual advice, but practical guidance for maintaining the social cooperation that makes survival possible in a world where individual families depend on community support during times of crisis. The death rituals that mark the end of earthly existence provide comfort for the grieving while ensuring that the deceased receives proper spiritual preparation for the journey ahead. The last rites administered by Father Benedict cleanse the dying person's soul of remaining sins, while the funeral mass and burial in consecrated ground provide continued spiritual protection. The mourning period that follows allows the community to support the bereaved family while gradually reintegrating them into normal social life. The religious education that children receive isn't formal schooling, but constant immersion in a world where spiritual concerns penetrate every aspect of existence. They learn prayers by repetition, absorb moral lessons through stories, and develop spiritual reflexes through daily practice. By adulthood, these religious responses become as automatic as breathing, providing guidance and comfort throughout lives filled with uncertainty and hardship. But the miraculous events that punctuate religious life aren't rare exceptions, but regular occurrences that demonstrate divine involvement in earthly affairs. Statues weep tears of blood when disaster threatens. Springs of holy water appear at sites where saints once prayed, and sick pilgrims recover their health through contact with sacred relics. These miracles provide evidence that the spiritual world remains actively engaged with human concerns, offering hope and encouragement to believers struggling with seemingly impossible challenges. The religious brotherhood that exists among believers creates bonds that transcend the social divisions that otherwise separate your community. Rich and poor, noble and peasant, all kneel together during Mass and receive the same spiritual benefits from participation in religious rituals. This equality before God provides a counterbalance to the rigid hierarchies that govern secular life, reminding everyone that ultimate judgment comes from divine rather than human authority. As evening prayers conclude and your family prepares for sleep, the religious observances that have woven through this day don't simply end, but transform into the night watches that maintain spiritual protection during the dangerous hours of darkness. The prayers whispered before sleep, the holy objects placed near your bedside, and the sacred names invoked for protection all continue the divine conversation that began with morning thanksgiving and will resume with tomorrow's dawn devotions. The faith that sustains your family through medieval life's countless challenges isn't just belief in abstract theological concepts, but trust in a spiritual system that provides practical guidance, emotional comfort, and social structure in a world where all three remain precious commodities. Religion doesn't separate you from daily life, but integrates every aspect of existence into a meaningful whole where earthly struggles serve eternal purposes, and divine grace makes human endurance possible. The bells that mark this day's end with evening vespers will ring again tomorrow for morning prayers, continuing the cycle that connects your small village to the vast community of believers that stretches across Europe and beyond. In this network of faith, your humble prayers join with those of kings and paupers, saints and sinners, all seeking the same divine protection and guidance that makes survival possible in a world where human strength alone proves insufficient for the challenges that each new day inevitably brings. As you settle into the straw that will serve as your bed through another night, the dying embers of your fire casting their last gentle glow across the rough wooden walls, you might pause to consider how different your world is from the one that will emerge centuries later. There are no electric lights to banish the darkness, no automobiles to shrink distances, no phones to carry voices across impossible spans. Yet in many ways, the fundamental rhythms of human existence remain remarkably constant. You worry about your children's future just as parents will worry 700 years hence. You take pride in work well done, find comfort in your spouse's familiar presence beside you, and dream of better times ahead when the harvest might be more generous or the winter less harsh. The love you feel for your family, the satisfaction that comes from a task completed with skill, the quiet contentment of an evening spent in peaceful company. These experiences transcend the boundaries of time and technology. Your world moves at the pace of seasons rather than seconds, measures distance in footsteps rather than miles, and finds entertainment in stories told by firelight rather than images flickering on screens. Yet the human heart that beats within your chest knows the same hopes and fears, the same capacity for joy and sorrow, the same deep need for meaning and connection that will drive human experience until the end of time. The village that surrounds your cottage will change beyond recognition in the centuries to come. Stone buildings will replace wooden ones, paved roads will follow the paths you walk in mud and dust, and machines will perform the work that now requires your calloused hands and aching back. But the fundamental truth of human community, the need for people to work together and care for one another, will remain as constant as the stars that wheel overhead in their eternal dance. The children sleeping beside you will grow up to face challenges you cannot imagine, just as their children will inherit a world shaped by forces beyond their parents' understanding. Yet they will draw strength from the same sources that sustain you, finding purpose in work, comfort in family, and hope in the promise that tomorrow might bring better fortune than today. The prayers that end your day connect you not only to the divine, but to the endless chain of human generations that stretches backward to the dawn of consciousness and forward to futures you will never see. In speaking these ancient words, you join your voice to millions of others who have sought protection, guidance, and grace in a world that often seems too large and dangerous for individual souls to navigate alone. The fire burns lower now, its light fading until only the faintest red glow remains to hold back the complete darkness. Outside, the wind whispers through the thatch of your roof and rustles the bare branches of trees that have weathered countless storms. The familiar sounds of night settle around your cottage like a blanket, reminding you that you are part of something larger than yourself, something that will continue long after your own brief candle has been extinguished. Tomorrow will bring its own joys and sorrows, its own tasks and challenges, its own small victories and defeats. You will rise with the sun, tend your animals, work your fields, share meals with your family, and find whatever happiness can be discovered in a life measured not by grand achievements, but by the steady accumulation of days well lived and duties faithfully performed. And when your time on this earth finally draws to a close, you will leave behind not monuments or riches, but something far more precious, the example of a life lived with dignity, courage, and love in the face of hardships that would break lesser spirits. The children you have raised, the work you have done, the kindnesses you have shown to neighbors in need, these will be your true legacy, woven into the fabric of human experience in ways too subtle to measure, but too important to ignore. Sleep now, dear traveler of this long-ago world. Rest in the knowledge that your struggles were not in vain, that your love was not wasted, and that your brief time beneath these ancient stars added its own small but essential thread to the great tapestry of human existence. The dawn will come again, as it always has and always will, bringing with it new possibilities and the eternal promise that life, however difficult, remains precious beyond all measure. And perhaps, in some quiet corner of the night, you can hear an echo of all those who will come after you, grateful for the foundation you helped to build, the traditions you helped to preserve, and the simple truth you lived every day, that we are all connected across the centuries by the common threads of hope, love, and the unshakable belief that tomorrow's sun will rise on a world made better by our presence in it.